This video is sponsored by Game Toppers. Turn your own kitchen or dining room table into a premium portable game solution at a fraction of the cost. Hey everybody, welcome to Drive-Thru Review 751. Today I'm going to talk about the new edition of Warcry, which Games Workshop has launched with this box set here, the Heart of Gur box set, which comes with 2 warbands, a lot of really awesome terrain, and some rules updates and some rules tweaks. Now in this video I'm not really going to go over the models and stuff like that. I'm mostly interested in the rules for this because I really did enjoy the original edition, so I was actually really nervous about the changes that they made. They made some drastic changes with Kill Team, which I still struggle with to this day. I made like 3 videos about it. And I was kind of nervous that they would change too much with this edition of Warcry. So I'm going to do kind of a rules deep dive, talk about some of the updates to the basic mechanics, the rules, how the narrative campaigns work. They kind of took a couple of different angles with that. And then I'll kind of just generally highlight some of the updates that they did to some of the existing warbands from the previous edition. So you can carry over all the old stuff. And they've kind of consolidated everything down into one compendium. Now at the time of I'm making this video, they've asked all of us folks that are doing this to not really show any details. I'm not going to get really crazy with like all the different stat changes and all that kind of stuff. I'll show you like one little example of like what they did, and then they changed like everything though. But from my general perspective, it's a lot of tweaks and stuff like that. Hit points here and there and that kind of thing. And then they've also of course kind of went and revamped some of the abilities and stuff for the different warbands, and also with the new thing called reactions, which I'll show you. This was like really the main rule change. So there's like one main rule change. All the other rules are pretty much the same, which I'll show you. And then largely it's the campaign structure and the narrative structure that's the big change, and then of course the revamping and balancing and all that stuff. So let's jump down to the table, look at some books. I'll also have some of the old books to see what you might be able to kind of carry forward, what kind of is compatible, what's not. I'll kind of talk a little bit about that as well. But 100% all your old models are compatible. So let's jump down to the table. So this is a little silly, but I'm going to show you the back of the box here. This is the terrain as it's been assembled and painted by the studio team there. And I'm just doing this to kind of elucidate and highlight the fact that this is really kind of a new setting as well in the Warcry universe. It's in the realm of Gur, which is like the realm of beasts, so it's above ground, and it's kind of coming out of the 8 points, the alt points, which is kind of the realm of chaos, if you will. And that they had some underground sort of settings in there in the last couple of releases of the big boxes there. So we're now moving into a whole different realm. But there's nothing really saying that you can't take some of these old rules kind of back into that sort of first edition realm. There's not really any reason to do that. So we'll talk about more of that in detail. Now, one thing to talk about component-wise here is you still have your same decks of cards for the twists, the victory conditions, the deployment maps, and so on. But you will notice that the symbols here on the back are the same as the first edition, but the color in the back and the card is not. So theoretically, you couldn't really shuffle these together. Like I've got a bunch of decks of cards now that have all been shuffled together with the different environments and stuff. So you might, pull out, oh, we're playing in this environment or this environment. Now, technically, you could not shuffle these in there, but I don't see why you couldn't. You could just shuffle them in there, and then you can kind of draw from the bottom or something like that if you really wanted to kind of randomize your area. I don't really know how well like some of these victory conditions and stuff like that would work with other environments. I don't see why they wouldn't. You might get some kind of bad combos there, but it's something to kind of keep in mind. Or theoretically, I think what most people do is they'll pick an environment and they'll pick the deck to go with it, and then they'll shuffle up each individual deck. So that's just something to notice there. Now, sticking with the cards for a minute. These are the cards for the 2 warbands that come in the box, and you can see they're a lot like the first edition. So you have your different abilities. So you've got your doubles, your triples, and your quads, and you can see this is the icon of the types of models that can use that. So you can have the different icons up here in the left. And similar to the first edition, you've got the points here, movement, toughness, hit points, some other icons there, and then the range of the attack dice, strength of the attack, and then kind of the normal hit and the critical hit there. Now the other thing that's different though, as we'll look at here, is on the other side of the card, you have a specific reaction to that particular warband. Now there's 3 kind of universal reactions that players can use, but warbands will sometimes have specific reactions there. Now for the other warbands, they're going to be in this compendium here, and you can just kind of take a quick look here. Let's take a look. So typical of the other books, you've got the other like the order book and the death book and the destruction book and everything. This is everything in one book now. So all of the different 4 grand alliances are all in this book. And then you can see here, like, so the reaction here for Daughters of Cain is there, and they have all the new abilities. And then they have some other tweaks and stuff like that for all of the stat lines. There might be points changes or hit points changes and things like that. Obviously, they don't really want us going over these for some reason, and I'm not going to spend 88 hours going through every single warband and trying to do that. So that's all in here. So you've now got everything covered from your existing collection with this one book here. And just for fun, they have some different colored dice here, but the dice system is the same, where each side has the different 6 dice and you roll them up, and if you get doubles and triples, then those activate abilities. The singles will go to contributing to your initiative and so on. But it's nice to have some different colored dice, but these are the same dice. So one thing to note is they did go back to the rounded edges. I know in the last box set, the the Catacombs box set, I think was the last one, or the one after that one, had the sharp edges, which is no big deal, but that's just interesting. Now, of course, you have a brand new core book. And what this core book does is it has all of the same rules as the basic one, like I explained, with the initiative, the different abilities, the combos and all that kind of stuff, the deployment, how you have like the dagger, the shield, and the hammer, and all that kind of fun stuff. Now, one thing it does kind of bring forward and sort of codify in the main rules are some of the changes that we saw over time in these Tome of Champion books here. So it's got a better outline for open play, match play, and narrative play in here. Kind of codifies the thralls, the allies, and that kind of thing that came in. So some of the monsters that you can add to your warband to kind of augment your warband, that's all kind of been consolidated in this book here. And we're going to go ahead and just dive into this book here, and I'll go over some of these in detail. And then the one kind of thing I'll be talking about, and I just want to kind of visually highlight that. So here's from last edition. This was the box I was thinking of with the sharp edge dice, the Red Harvest here. So this is very much like a narrative book. You've got some different campaigns in here. They came up with some different kind of styles of quest lines. There's some rules for some of the terrain that came with this, kind of like the oil mining types of terrain, and some rules for the different warbands and stuff. So this is still a first edition book, right? And then now we have this kind of narrative piece to the big box here. And this is the Rotten Ruin. And what this has here is specific campaigns and quests and what's called campaign arcs for the 2 warbands that come in the box. Now, those warbands are not mentioned in the compendium. So for right now, I'm sure this will probably change down the road as they release these warbands individually. The rules for these, of course, are only with the big box. That's the only way you can get them. But they're not currently in this compendium here. Now, just to be clear, the compendium doesn't have any kind of the narrative campaign stuff. This is straight like abilities and stats, and some of the allies and thrall stuff is in here. These has the abilities and stats for the 2 warbands in the box, but it also has the quest lines and then what's called the campaign arc, which I'll talk about in a minute. Those are in this book here. So you could kind of perceive a future of future boxes and future warbands that might add those little narrative things, similar to what they did in first edition. They might have like a new sort of set of terrain or a big box that then has some kind of narrative campaign to go alongside of it, and possibly with some new warbands. Or maybe they might come out with some books and stuff that, are just standalone books that have their own quest lines and stuff. But all of that stuff here in general, other than these 2 warbands, is baked into this main core rulebook. So they've got all of that in here, and then again, you just have the new stats and stuff here. So really, if you wanted to get started, I think they're going to sell the rulebook separately. I'm not sure. Obviously, this is going to be separate. You could get the 2 books, and then you'd be away you go, and you'd be playing with the new updated rules with your old stuff, if you were somehow not interested in this awesome terrain box, which is really cool. So let's dive in here directly to the rules, and we'll take a look a little bit of that, and I'll kind of give you some general thoughts after the end. Okay, just some general like publication notes. The book very much feels like an edition of 40K or Age of Sigmar or something, where it seems to be a little bit more integrated into the Age of Sigmar universe, and what's going on with this setting and stuff. So they have that kind of typical splash. I'm not going to show you all the art, but there's a lot of cool art and stuff like that. And they give you some background here on the setting. You can see the Era of the Beast, with everything moving into Gur and all that stuff. So I won't spoil any of that. You guys can go ahead and read it. And then they talk about like the different armies and models and figures from all the different factions and stuff like that in here. And then we're going to jump here into the core rules, which again is pretty much the exact same, except for when we get to the reactions here. So all these move actions and the combat dice and all that stuff. So everything here is, in terms of the reaction, is triggered by the wait action. So this is the wait action can be used in two ways. And so you can either, on your turn, like before, you can take two actions. And if your first one is wait, then you just and if you take you can do one action and then do a wait action, you're basically done. But you can also decide to take a wait action, and then that will basically allow you to do a reaction, kind of like Overwatch and some other games. So if we go here, we can see, okay, here is the reactions. Now again, you've got your abilities like before, because if you roll doubles, triples, or quads of your dice, you get access to your special abilities for the factions. There's also, let's see, 5 sort of universal special abilities here, and then you have these reactions. So if the fighter has not activated yet in the battle, or you've made them wait, or there's some rules, if you have some renown to spend in a campaign, then you can make a reaction. So let's just take a close look at these 3 reactions here, because everybody's going to get these, and everybody has like a specific one, but I'm not going to get into all of those. So counter, a fighter can make this reaction after they are targeted by a melee attack, but before their hit rolls are made. For each hit roll from the attack action that misses, allocate 1 damage point to the attacking fighter. For each roll of 1, allocate 2 damage points. So you can do that as a sort of counter attack. Take cover. A fighter that is in cover can make this reaction after they are targeted by a missile attack, but before the hit rolls are made. After the rolls have been made, roll a dice for each critical hit. On a 4+, the critical hit becomes a hit instead. So you can already see some of the balancing that's going on. If you're familiar with first edition, even these first 2 are really going to help with the balance. And then the last one, strike them down. A fighter can make this reaction when a visible enemy fighter within 1 inch of them makes a disengage action, right? Because remember, if you're adjacent, you can do disengage to move away. Roll a dice. On a 4+, allocate D6 damage points, so you can hit them as they move away from you. So that's just one. So let me just show you one of the others here from the Rotmire Creed. This is an interesting one. We'll zoom in a little bit. Bile Blood. A fighter can make this reaction when they are targeted by a melee attack. After the damage is totaled, but before it's allocated, roll a die for each critical hit scored. On a 3+, allocate 3 damage points back to the attacker, because these guys are kind of a nurgly, sort of disgusting thing. So they can, for all of like the critical damage that they take, they're going to kind of puke out and bleed out this disgusting bile from their blood. So that's kind of a cool thing. So that's just one example of some cool things that you can do. So it's going to add a lot of dynamics to the gameplay. So let's move on. So here I'm just going to do a little bit of a flip through, because this is sort of the most important part, at least to me. So this is going to break down the ways of play. So here you have open play, right? So you get a little bit of that. You can do open play within the context of a campaign, so you can get glory points. There's a couple of these things, and they're typical sort of multiplayer games and stuff like that. There's some quick setup and play just for fun kind of stuff here. Then we have a breakdown here of some 6 different match play scenarios that you can play for doing tournaments, and there's rules for tournaments, quick kind of ways to get a tournament up and running. And then we very quickly move into narrative play here. And so there's a few different things that we're going to talk about here. We have basically 2 types of narrative play. We've got our campaign questing that we're going to do, and we have our campaign arcs, okay? And what's going to happen is there's also, let me just kind of stumble through a little bit, because there's a lot kind of going on with this. So there's a lot more going on in terms of the post-campaign sequence. So let's just kind of look through it here, because I think it's important just to kind of do this in detail. So first here, you're going to gain glory, and then you're going to get glory for basically a few different things. If you played in the campaign battle, if the battle's a draw, if you won the campaign, and then there's a comparison that if your warband was greater and so on, or lesser. Then you're going to suffer injuries. So there's an injury table over here, which is nice to have. And then you've got renown, further your quest, which I'll talk about in a minute, because each warband is going to be on different quests theoretically. And then you're going to go out and sort of explore different territories. So a lot of this is going to be very similar to how the Age of Sigmar narrative stuff is working. And you have like different encampments and checks and stuff. So let's just pop back out here. So we've got injuries and stuff like that. So that's cool. That's one of the things that was kind of missing from the first edition, which they've now added, which is neat. Let's see. And then here we have kind of the encampments and the exploration that you can send out. So kind of in between games, you can go find new areas, spend your glory points to basically kind of give yourself universal buffs and move your base and so on. And sometimes you might be forced to leave one of your current campsites and so on. So it's a little bit more involved in that case with kind of the in-between game stuff. You've got little artifacts and rewards that you can look for. And then you've also got a list, like you can have like a little map campaign kind of idea. It's sort of loosely call that a map campaign. We've got different encampment sites and so on. And then you have like different point limits based on the different places that you can go and reputation modifiers. So all this thing's going to kind of affect your warband here. And typically you're going to have one hero up to 3 heroes. You could have a monster in your warband to add there. And then let's get to the good stuff here. So now we have here these quests. So typically what you're going to do is you're going to have a quest line. So here's a universal quest that everybody can take. Then you have a condition here to meet. And you can keep playing this quest here, or keep playing games until you fulfill this quest and then go on a different quest. And so you and your opponents can be on different quests and different quest lines. And that's very, very similar to the first edition, right? Where you had these kind of conversions quests, and they added new stuff here with the Red Harvest stuff where there was, I forget what they were called here. All right, they had the branching convergent quests, that's what they were. And so you would play games and then you would have kind of a convergent battle to kind of finish your quest and so on. So it's just slightly tweaked and different here so that you can do it. It's a little bit more loosey-goosey, which I think is good, so it's a little bit more free-form. And then you have lots of different quests here. So there's a bunch of universal quests, and then I think there are 3 for each faction. So here we've got 1 Chaos Quest, 2, and then 3 here. And then so you can get different rewards based on these different things. Some have specific battle plans you have to complete, kind of like your Convergence battle plan in the first edition. So you've got these. I'm not going to spoil any of these here. And then you've also got this other part here, which are these campaign arcs. And these are typically, it says 3 to 5 battles to do that. And this book here has the specific quests for these 2 warbands. Now the quests that are in the core rules aren't specific to, there's not like a Stormcast one or a Khorne one or whatever. They're based on the 4 Grand Alliances. Here are specific for these 2, and there's also a campaign arc that just involves these 2. So it's only those 2 warbands that are involved in that. Now here we have campaign arcs that can have anybody in it, and different numbers of players. And so these are going to be very specific sort of just narrative stories to kind of play through. And so it's going to come here with some different battle plans you can see here. And these all kind of have to do with the different things. And then we have a very sort of almost like a matched play kind of vibe here. We have A versus B, C versus D, and then you kind of go back and forth. And then some other different rules for how to make progress to the campaign. This one you have to have some Seraphon models to act as kind of NPCs for this specific one. So you have some extra rules there. And then these are some of the cards and stuff that are just printed in the back of the book. So that's kind of what's going on here with the new rules, new campaign structure, and so on. So I'll just have some kind of initial first impressions, general thoughts, back up with my talking head there. Okay, so that's a brief overview of what's kind of going on with the new edition. So I'm going to kind of break away from my normal kind of pillars of a review and just talk a little bit generally about it. So first of all, what do you have from the first edition that you can get rid of if you want? So if you have one of these 4 tomes, which has like the old stat lines and stuff like that for the different Grand Alliances. So here's the Order one, and they had one for the other 3. You can, if you want, get rid of these because they're not really useful in the new edition. Now you could keep them and stuff and play with the old points and the old abilities, but I don't think many people will do that. Now, if you do have some of these narrative books here, and specifically, the Tome of Champions, this is a little bit dicier of a thing. Now, the narrative books here are are probably worth keeping, I think, because it's got some of the rules for some of the specific terrain, which you can of course use. It has some of the specific objectives and stuff like that that you might want to keep around if you want to play in those other settings with the new rules. There's no reason you can't do that. And it has some of the old warbands and things like that will be kind of outdated. So like, for example, this box that had this book, those warbands have been updated with new points and stats and stuff. Now the Tome of Champions, there is little nuggets stuff in here, like there's the hidden agendas and there's some these other quest lines in these Tome of Champions which you could keep around. Largely though, I feel like this has all been kind of integrated into the new edition, so I don't really know that these are really worth hanging on to that much. I mean, of course, if you want to go back and play first edition, you don't like the new edition for some reason, then you can go back and do that, then keep them. But just kind of thinking about moving forward. Now, if you have all the old cards and stuff like that, and I kind of wish they didn't put some of these warband things on cards, because it's like, do I have the cards? Is the card up to date? Is the book up to date? Which is the most up to date? That's kind of annoying. They should stick with one or the other. But the old cards and stuff you can probably get rid of in terms of the ones for the warband. Now the cards for the deployments and the twists and all that, you can use all that stuff, like all of that stuff, all the schemas for laying out the territory and the deployment maps with the whole hammer, shield and dagger setup. That's all consistent, so you can still use all of that stuff for the old settings. So that's really cool. That's a good thing. So they haven't really deviated that much, and I think that's a really good thing. It's not like all of your old, of course, with their games, all the models usually always carry over. So all those models you spent time painting and putting all your time and effort into, those are always usually going to carry over with the Games Workshop stuff. At least for, well, now that I said it out loud, I'm like, well, they canceled that one army I have. But, in general, I mean, you can make believe that there's something else too, whatever. But a lot of times they'll change like the whole dynamic. So all of those kind of like accessories and supplemental things that you have, in the case of this, like the twist cards and the deployment cards, a lot of times those will go away, which is too bad. But in this case, you don't really have to get rid of those. So that's actually a really cool thing. And so the other thing to say, okay, so now we'll keep, some of these narrative books, a couple of narrative books moving forward. The old rule book, of course, you'll get rid of as well. So talking about how this ecosystem is going to move forward, which to me is really the thing I always get hung up on sometimes with these transitions to editions with Games Workshop games. So forgive me for going over that, because to me this is really the most important part of it. Especially in this case, the game hasn't changed really, other than the reactions, which look really, really cool. I really didn't know that I was missing that. And of course I got to put it into practice, but just reading, I'm like, oh, this is going to fix so many things that I didn't really realize were that broken. So just having the reactions there is going to give you really some cool stuff to use, because you can only use the one reaction, per activation and stuff. So it's going to give you some kind of choice there of when to kind of pull that trigger on, who's, when your opponent does something, you're like, okay, so I'm going to do that reaction here or do it there. And it's going to give your opponent pause, more importantly, in terms of, okay, if I'm going to go after this guy, they might pull this trigger on me. And it makes that combat less like I smash you, right, without any sort of response, to that individual. Obviously, your opponent can ensnare you in a certain way and try to, they can react with some of the other figures. But having that one figure get some kind of say back in the matter to react in that way is pretty cool. So that's going to be a nice, I think, light touch to kind of add a little bit of complexity to the decision making, but not a whole lot, because one of the best things about Warcry is its simplicity in terms of just set up, small footprint, get things played, and you can knock out a couple of games in a couple of hours. That's a really cool part of it. So the other thing is, I like that they have the compendium here. And they kind of got everything consolidated into one book, so it's a one book buy other than the rule book. So that's a really cool thing. And they have a lot of stuff in here. I mean, everybody is covered in here from what I can see. So I think they did a good job there. And then the other part of it is this whole campaign arc part of it. And this I think is really the one part of Warcry that I think I had, after some time playing the game, I had some criticism about, but it was really light, because the one thing I really liked about the first edition, which they've kept in the new edition, is how you can be on different quests and you can just be interacting, and kind of it kind of fit with the theme, because you were just two warbands sort of just roaming around the 8 points trying to eke out sort of a living, if you will, and you kind of all had your own little purpose, and that fits the setting. It's not like some other settings where the warbands are more in tune with each other, in a thematic sense, right? Because they're more like going after the same objective. We're trying to get, that treasure trove, like in Frostgrave or even in Necromunda. We're trying to get this objective that we both are competing for. So it's like a zero-sum kind of game. Where in this sort of setting, and even in the first edition and in the new edition, you've got your own agenda that maybe has nothing to do with somebody else, but you run into them and you need to beat them in the face because, it's just the world that you live in. And so that it has that vibe, and that's pretty cool. And then you can also fork off and do these campaign arcs where it's like, okay, now our sort of agendas are aligned or completely misaligned in this case. And then you will have something where you are more concerned about what the other person is doing and what their objectives are and what they're sort of after, because they're after the same thing as you are. So you can kind of mix and match that. But you can also kind of plug and play a little bit of, if I'm playing Billy today and then I'm playing Francesca tomorrow, I can still kind of carry that stuff up. Because I'm this far in my quest, if this is my encampment that I've got, so now this is kind of the state of my warband. I don't have to fully reset just to play with somebody else. So you can be on a narrative journey with your campaign or with your warband that you don't have to. You're not like married to the group of players. So if you just like to do pick up and play and go through that, then you've got that ability, and everybody has that ability. And there's some scaling, like I showed you with the reputation stuff, so you can get little bonuses and stuff if you're playing with like a weaker or greater reputation, and sort of the encampment and stuff that you have. There's some risk involved to losing that, and the certain encampments will give you different buffs. So everybody's going to be kind of playing around with that. Now, if you're like, okay, that's going to be unwieldy and unbalanced, I mean, I can appreciate that. It's not going to be perfectly balanced, but there's match play. So if you want to play in a tournament, go ahead. But I like that there is that sort of loose campaign, and that's kind of a new concept that we've seen, not just in Warcry, but like in some of these other games. I mean, I just reviewed a game called Dead Reckoning the other day, which is like a completely different game. It's a pirate deck building kind of game. And you can play that game with a campaign that's very strict and has you go through exactly 6 scenarios, 6 games of it, and everything is kind of tied in and you score it as you go along. Or you can kind of mix and match some of these saga cards and then play with that. And then so you can kind of bounce in and out of those games. If you can't make it one Wednesday or whatever, then you come back to the next game and be like, oh, what happened? Well, Billy did this. This is the same kind of thing where you don't have that like time commitment. There's no stress involved with the campaign. Because I think that can be a stressful thing, is always getting together the same group of people on the same night at the same time. And then it's like, okay, well, Billy's not here or Frankie's not here. And now let's just do this. And, Frankie's missing out because of this thing. Makes it easier to just play the game. And that's at the end of the day, what people want to do is sit down and play the game. And if you want to do the commitment of like 3 to 5 games of do the campaign arc, it gives you the option to do that. So I think it's really cool. I'm really impressed by what they did. I was, like I said, nervous at the beginning about the second edition. I was like, oh, they're just going to like totally throw everything out. It's going to be a different game. It's like this whole other thing. It's like the game was great. Everybody loved the game. And really the only complaints I heard was some of the narrative things were not like quite as fleshed out. But again, I was sort of on the other side of it with like, I like the loosey-goosey side of it. And then there was the whole balance thing. In the first edition, you had like all of the Warcry warbands were like its own game. And then if you mixed in all the Age of Sigmar armies who could like spin off their little warbands to play in this game, they were always just seemed like, I don't know, every game I played was like this, where they were overpowered over the others. Like 2 separate games. You had the army game, with the armies, and then the Warcry warbands, and they were kind of playing 2 different games. So hopefully the balance is come through here, and then they can play together. And you can have the Warcry warbands, with mixed in some of the more principal armies from the Age of Sigmar universe. And so, yeah, it looks like they've taken some steps to do that, and they've kept that core game, added the reactions, which is neat. So I'm pretty impressed by it. I'm excited about it to get this terrain out and play it. and have some fun with it. So anyway, that's kind of an overview of kind of where the rules and the ecosystem is at. So thanks.